So hello and welcome to the sixth adult book club meeting for Comics Experience Graphic Novel Month Club. We're extraordinarily happy to have Neil Gaiman here tonight. But though I want to say we were originally supposed to have J.H. Williams here in person. J.H. got a bacterial infection this weekend, and he was in the hospital. He's fine now, but he was too weak and he couldn't make it. And we, to which we say, of course, good. We wish you good health. We hope that everything's fine and that you get better really soon because you're a good guy. But yeah, we're here for the sixth book club meeting, and we have. Can we show the crowd just so we can see that there's like a bunch of people sitting here? Look, it's a bunch of people. Hi, a bunch of people. How are you? Hi. And then we've got Neil Gaiman here, who's about to show up on the screen. There's Neil. Yeah. So I'm really excited to be here for Sandman. I mean, I've been selling comics a really long time. Actually, let's put that old picture up on the screen because that's terrifying, actually, in a way. This will just take a second. It's all good. I've been selling comics a really long time, and this is 25 years and like 6 weeks ago. This was October 26th of 1990, apparently, according to my records. And that's Neil and I when we were little tiny children. I was 21 years old or 22 years old here, which is ridiculous. And yeah, that's absurd, isn't it? That's absurd, isn't it, Neil?
It's very, very unlikely, Brian. I do remember being really hard to convince that you were 21 at the time. You had your own comic store, and you were such a grown-up.
Yeah. That was what? That was like your second signing ever? Is that right?
No, it was I think something like the second signing in the U.S.
Yeah.
The first signing in the U.S. was a very peculiar one at Jim Handley's universe in was it Staten Island?
Staten Island was his main store, yeah.
So that was me and Mike Dringenberg went out there at the beginning of December '88, and we signed and there were just Black Orchid #1 and #2 and Sandman #1s. And we had maybe 12 people there, and, including the strange, rather awkward guy who wanted to know by how much Sandman would go up if he bought it, and that kind of stuff. And they're going, I don't know, just buy the comic, it's got a story in.
Yeah.
So that was our first signing. But then you and I met at the San Diego Comic Convention.
Exactly.
And you came over, and at that point, I think I was up to about Sandman 7, maybe Sandman 8.
No, I think it was 6. 6 had just come out, I think.
Okay, 6 had we were still we were in seriously early days.
Yeah.
And you came over and said, Sandman was this thing that you were selling in Comics Experience. And people were buying it from you. You were hand selling it, and would I come in and do a signing? So you were right in the very, very beginning. That was our first signing, and then our second signing got really weird.
Yeah, no, the Season of Mist tour where we had almost everyone who worked on the book. Not quite everyone, but almost everyone.
I thought that was our third signing. What was the signing with the Sandman 8s? With the limited
No, that was our first signing. That was signing #1. Are
you sure that was the very first?
Yeah. No, I'm sure that was the very first. No, because I remember, because no one knew who you were,
Yeah.
and so this is great because Neil's like major star these days, right? Like you have to fly in first class, you put him in an hotel, and that's not because he's a jerk or anything, but that's.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, his food's here. His food's here. Yes. Like now you have to put Neil up in a really nice place. But then for that signing, Neil actually slept on my sofa in my shitty one-bedroom apartment. It's not even like now I have 3 bedrooms now. Well, 2 bedrooms, right? It would be nice now, but like then it was like, oh, it was a terrible, like, nope, you wouldn't want it. It was a sofa I'm pretty sure that we found on the street, actually, if you want to know the truth.
There were things living in that sofa. It was
there probably were.
Busy sofa.
Yeah, it was. But it was awesome because, no one knew who you were back then. You weren't, famous.
I wasn't anybody.
Yeah. You were just a guy doing comics, and we like comics, and so let's sell comics. Let's make people happy with comics, Yeah. And we've done I want to say 5 or 6 different signings with Neil, which is probably more than any comic book shop ever, and more than almost any bookstore probably too.
Well, also because you carried on doing events with me after I stopped doing events.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's because you're such a good person about it. You're like, I'll do it for Brian, sure.
It's true. That's why I'm here now. That's why you will get to watch me eating and answering questions and stuff. No, I don't forget. I don't forget that Brian had his own rather impressive part to play in some of this stuff because Brian was on the phone to the Bruce Bristows and the Bob Waynes of this world, who were DC's marketing department back when dinosaurs walked here, telling them that things like Sandman collections would sell.
Yeah.
And
no, because there weren't collections back then. That's the thing. Like, you see, you're in a store full of books right now, right? Like, most of this stuff around you didn't exist. There were not, like, of course, comics are all in the shot, but all the graphic novels, like, this stuff didn't exist back then. I mean, there were like 12 graphic novels in 1989, 15 graphic novels maybe. And so when Sandman came out bound as a book, that was a thing, and we got behind it in like this major way. We were like, Sandman is the thing. Everybody's got to read this, and it was, it really helped.
Also, let me tell the reason why I have done stuff with Brian since that very first signing, which I think may have actually been, was it for Doll's House?
The very first signing was again when Sandman was still a little comic and no one knew what it was. 9 was out the week that we did our signing.
Okay, so the next signing that we did, which makes more sense to me now. So the next signing that we did was the first thing resembling a signing tour that I did, which was for the Doll's House. Sandman 16 had just come out, and the Doll's House. And I was at Forbidden Planet, a store no longer there, in Los Angeles. And the phone in the store rang, because nobody had cell phones back then. And I was told, it's Brian Hibbs from Comix Experience on the phone for you. And I go to Brian. And Brian says, hey, we've got these, they just sent us a load of Sandman 8s. And we were going to do we're looking at these things, and they appear to be very different to any other Sandman 8 because they have the Karen Berger introduction on the inside front cover, which was kind of weird for me because I knew that those had never existed. That was what it meant to have been, but it wasn't. And given that the people in Forbidden Planet at that moment were tearing off the covers of the Sandman 8, the boxes of Sandman 8, so they got to create a display, I put the phone down on Brian and shouted at them to drop those comics and stand away from them. And then we got on the phone to DC, and we discovered that basically at some point DC Comics, because the copyright indicia on Sandman 8 had been on the page that they didn't print, which was the inside front cover, they had gone back to press at the very end of having printed, 60,000, 70,000 copies with this missing, and they'd simply pressed the button off and on, so in order to create the one copy they needed to file with the Library of Congress. But that had created maybe 600, 800 copies. And those were the copies that they had sent out. They didn't know about them. And those were the copies they had sent out to Brian and to the various stores on this tiny little signing tour I was doing. And what impressed me was every other store on that signing tour immediately started selling them for $20, for $40, for $100, for $150, for $200. Brian, who, like all these other stores, was sent 100 copies or whatever it was of these.
Yeah, it was 200, a sealed case of 200.
You got 200 copies, and Brian gave them away.
Yeah.
He said, "I didn't pay for them. I'm not selling them."
I'm not selling them.
And this was like, Forbidden Planet, who were having cash flow problems, sold their 100 that they'd got, and got $10,000 for them, and this was huge and important.
Yeah.
Brian used those 200 copies to get readers.
Yeah.
And he gave them
readers, exactly.
And he would say to them, "Read this comic. It's really good. If you don't like it, you can give it back. If you like it, come over and I'll sell you the graphic novel."
Yeah.
And he put little, had a Comix Experience stickers on the front of these comics, which were at that point worth $100 each.
Mm-hmm.
And which were only ever going to be worth more. And Brian was giving them away.
Yeah, no, I defaced them. Not only did I defaced them. I did it, putting a sticker on it, defacing it. Not only did I switch back to me, Jordan. Not only did I sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Just because it's boring just to have Neil only on the screen, Not only did I give them away, but I literally went out to City College and State. And I they have their free Take One magazine racks, and I would put stacks of them there. I went on the bus, and I would every bus that I would take, I would leave 5 copies on seats on the bus, because the idea was that we would Johnny Appleseed it, right? We would turn Sandman into this thing, and we actually kind of did turn Sandman into this thing. Rory Root, who God bless his soul, he's no longer with us, but it was my favorite comic book retailer ever, would talk about how stores like ours were tastemaker stores, that our actual function in life was to promote things and make them viral and make them move out for everyone else. And I want to think that I'm, not just for Sandman, but for Neil in general, that we're one of the reasons that Neil is an internationally famous rock star celebrity guy person, because we did this, but we did it because we believed in the work, and the work was good, and yeah, we're part of an ecosystem, and I think sometimes in current market we forget that. So I don't know.
I don't forget, which is the reason I'm happy to do it.
Because Neil's awesome. Yeah. So let's actually start. Let's stop making this the Brian and Neil handjob show, and make this the no, I know, and I appreciate it. I totally appreciate it, Neil. I'm just because no one cares about me, right? They're all watching because of you, right? And we have 9 viewers on the so what? Okay, thank you, Aaron. I care about you too. So let's sort of talk about Overture a little bit, because one of the things that I'm kind of both curious about and almost always when people go back to things that they did in the past, Neil, and I think this, they suck. Right? People, 20 years later, I'm going to revisit this. It's bullshit. It's terrible. When they actually announced Overture, I was like, oh my God, this is. I mean, I love Neil, and I'm going to promote this, but it's not going to work. There's no chance that he can come and actually recapture that but yet I feel as though you actually kind of topped yourself. And so I guess Mike, and so that was a really hand job question. That's not even a question. So, but the question is so what was the actual impetus of this? I mean, we knew that the 25th anniversary was coming up in the book, but was this people at DC going, "Hey Neil, hey, we want to do this," or was this like, I actually really want to do this myself, or was this a combination of those factors, or what?
I've been asking to do it for years. Uh, the the original plan was to do the story for Sandman's 20th anniversary.
Mm.
So I thought that will be brilliant. It'll and the story itself was something that I've been sitting on for years. I mean, it wasn't like I didn't know that stuff, but it never fitted anywhere in Sandman's 1 to 75. And I always figured that it would make a great little standalone story at some point. So that was why it sat there, and I was going to do it for Sandman's 20th anniversary. And round about year 18, I guess, I started talking to them, and everybody liked the idea, but certain people at DC Comics thought that I should do it on the same terms and for the same royalty and everything as I had agreed when I first signed my first contract for Sandman, age 26.
Yeah.
In 1987, and my attitude was that actually, I thought maybe they could pay a little more, and maybe my royalty rate could go up a bit. And this wasn't me sort of like holding them upside down over a thing and saying, you have to pay me lots of money. It was actually me. I remember working out the numbers on it and saying to them, okay, if you pay me, if you add on whatever it was, 1.2%, then in 16 years, I will, of Sandman selling, I will have actually earned as much as if I'd written a novel. So it's like, it'll still take 16 years for me to feel like I'm not being screwed, but at least there is the potential of not feeling that I'm being screwed.
Yeah.
And because, my royalty on any novel that I write is, I think, approximately 7 times my royalty for DC back then on Sandman. And I was told that was impossible. Basically, I was told that if they raised my royalty, then they had to raise everybody's royalty, and they weren't going to do that. And if they went back and changed anything for me, they'd have to change it for everybody, and they couldn't do that. And that was where it died.
Yeah.
So round about year 22, maybe 23, there were a bunch of new people at DC, and I had lunch with one of them and said, I'm really sad that I never got to do the story that I always call it Sandman Zero, because I always figured it came before Sandman 1. I said I've never got to do Sandman Zero. I would love to do it at some point. And they said, well, how does 25th anniversary sound? And I said, great. Of course, here are we now, 2 days after the 27th anniversary.
Sure.
With the book out, probably a year after everybody expected it to be out.
No, pretty much right on time, actually, Neil. I gotta say, I mean, no one expected it to come out on time.
I'm not going to argue with that. The only thing that kept me going through the last half of Sandman Overture was whenever an issue would come out, the reviews would come in, and the first reviews would always say, well, it's been, 4 months since we last saw one of these, but the quality is good enough that we cannot grumble. And I
Yeah.
thought, okay, that's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember what it was like when things were frustrating. I remember the last couple of issues of Watchmen. Um, when each issue is a little bit further and a little bit later, and finally.
Okay, wait, but hold on. I got to do this just because. Switch back to me for a second. Just because, for history's sake, I really want to point out that the 12 issues of Watchmen shipped in 14 months. This is not like we everybody references Watchmen. This is not on Neil, but people do this all the time. Like, Watchmen was really, really late. Watchmen was not really, really late. Watchmen was a little bit late. Yes, it's not Dark Knight. Dark Knight was really late. Dark Knight was like 8 months behind schedule. They put out 14 issues of Watchmen in 12 months. When you look at that book, it's kind of crazy that they did that. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on you on that one. But Watchmen was late, but not that late. It's not Camelot. Camelot 3000. There was 2 years between issues there.
That is because Brian Bolland drew it and Dave Gibbons didn't.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that nobody knows how late The Killing Joke was because they didn't put it on the schedule till it was done.
Yes. All right. So you had been wanting to do this at the 20th anniversary, so you're kind of 5 years into it. Actually, that's an interesting question. Do you think that having that extra 5 years of gestation period, like, made it better, or?
Well, I think having J.H. Williams 3 made it better. Yeah. Had we done it, 5 years earlier, he would have been busy with Promethea, and we would have had to have one of the earlier models like J.H. Williams 1 or 2 do it. But no, having J. Thank you. Having J.H. made it better, and I don't know that we would have had him 5 years earlier.
Yeah.
And that was wonderful. But things get. It was always the same sort of story. It was always the same sort of thing. But there was definitely a point by about issue 3 where probably issue 3, where the comics would come in from JH, and I would go, okay, I have to up my game.
Yeah.
And these are amazing, but okay, if he can do this, I can push this even further.
Mm-hmm.
And I would then go and try and push it even further just to see what would happen.
Yeah.
And then, of course, what would inevitably happen is that JH would then go, haha, you thought I couldn't do that. Well, watch this then. And then he would take even longer and do something even more beautiful.
Yeah. I think I might argue that was the secret weapon of Sandman all along. It was never you. I mean, we all love you, but it was actually the artists and your collaborators. And I suspect that you would agree with that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of unfortunate in some ways that because of A, the number of different artists, and B, the fact that I'm a New York Times best-selling author, my name goes really big on the cover of Sandman.
Yeah.
And other people's names tend to get smaller, and sometimes drop off altogether. But no, I mean, Sandman was not a novel. Sandman was a comic. And the thing that I think one of the places that it worked best was the fact that I was always writing for the artist.
Yes.
For Overture, I always knew that it was going to be a space opera. And I always knew that it was going to feel glorious and colorful and have huge vistas. My I think we only talked to two artists about doing it, and the first artist wasn't even offered it. He was just sort of sounded out on whether or not he'd be interested, and we realized that it would have been even later had he done this, which was
So it was
Jim
Rob
Lee.
Liefeld? Is that right, Rob Liefeld?
It was Jim. It was Jim Lee.
Oh yeah, well, it never would have come out then. Actually, I gotta say, as much as I love Jim, I love Jim, but that would have been a terrible comic book. Jim Lee drawing Sandman, that would have been all weird. No, I'm very glad that it was J.H. Williams. Yeah.
I think it was perfect. I mean, we looked at Jim, and I thought about Jim just because I love the idea of these giant planets exploding, and I thought I love the idea of Jim drawing the point where all the different Sandmans meet. I thought that would have been quite good. But anyway, he was busy, and it was never going to happen. And it wasn't even like we even really offered it to him because it sounded enough. And then we thought about JH, who had sidled over to me at a convention. You know, that thing where I was standing outside San Diego, just breathing. I think having been gone through one of those things where you have to get through 10,000 people to get from point A to point B, and they all want you to sign something for them. And I'm standing there catching my breath, and Jay sidles over to me and says, "I'm J.H. Williams, I do Promethea, and I want to work with you." And I said, "I am a ridiculously huge fan of yours." And okay, we will. And I filed that one away, which meant that that when it actually came to asking somebody to do it, he was who we asked.
Yeah. Oh, good choice. I mean, that you couldn't have made a better choice. That he's as a sort of ultimate collaborator. He's definitely the one. So look, I want to switch a little bit here over to some of the questions that come on over the internet. We have people watching who've asked questions. We also have people here in the audience. So I know that some of you probably want to ask questions. Yes, no, maybe so. So we've got right here. We've got a laptop with a camera right there. So if you want to ask a question, I don't want to say line up because that's a little weird, but kind of sidle over to this side so that I know. I'm going to ask an internet question first, and then we'll sort of move over to that camera, and we'll try to make this work. And I think the thing to do is to go in the order in which they were asked, perhaps, which was, yeah, let's start. So let's start with Sean Pagado. Hello, Sean. Sean asks, most writers stick to novels or comics, but not both, which is definitely true. Certainly, most are not prolific at both. How does the work process differ between the two? Are there interesting challenges or strengths about one or the other?
The biggest difference between them is that while you're using words to write comics and you're using words to write novels, the words do different things. Because the words that you are doing in a novel are intended to go straight into the reader's head and build up pictures and build up people and build up places. The words that I write in a comic script are intended to go into the head of the artist. And it tends to be an average of about 4-to-1. So for every page that you read of a comic, I wrote 4 pages, telling an artist, perhaps telling a colorist, telling a letterer, what's happening in each panel, what the characters look like, what they're saying, what they're doing, and the word balloons will be in there too, and anything else. But I'm not writing to the reader. I'm writing to the artist, and then I'm trying to get the artist to then be my hand, be my mouth, be my but then but what I really want to do is inspire the artist to do fantastic work, because then I look good. Um, and 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 the thing works. In terms of technique, you can do lots of things in comics you can't do in prose, and you can do things in prose you can't do in comics. The big obvious ones are in comics, people know what characters look like. I couldn't do something like I did in Anansi Boys, in which all of the characters are black, but you're going to have to figure that one out for yourself. Um, because what I'm actually doing is identifying all the white characters as white whenever they come on. And any character whose skin color is not described is going to be dark skinned. Most of them are Afro Caribbean. Um, I couldn't do that in a comic because you would be looking at these characters and you would need to see what they look like.
Yeah.
Whereas what I can't do, and it pisses me off and it drives me nuts, and I keep trying, but I never manage. What you can't do in a novel is a silent panel.
Mm.
You can't do a blank panel.
Mm-hmm.
Thomas Stern tried to in Tristram Shandy. There's a point where a character gets hit over the back of the head, and the rest of the page is black. But I think, as far as I'm concerned, that was just him trying early proto-comics. You can't really do silent panels because if you're I love silent panels. I love that point in a conversation in comics where you cut to somebody and they don't say anything.
Yeah.
Whereas in a novel, if I said Fred looked at Joe, Joe didn't say anything, I just said something.
Yeah. Yeah.
I haven't done that silently. And the fact that you can do that silently, you can do it without words, I would think is a glorious thing.
Yeah, it's interesting because even in comics, you could have a balloon that was ... and it would actually work, but you can't do that in prose, right? Like ... wouldn't work in prose.
You could try it. I've occasionally played with things like um, speech marks, question mark, close speech marks. Um, but you're right. There are things that you can do in comics that you can't do in prose, and as I say, vice versa. And there
Yeah.
are things that you can do in radio plays that you can't do in
Yes.
movies, and there are
Sure.
things that you can do in poetry that you can't do in any. That the joy for me was always just going. Comics are a medium. They are a glorious medium still in its relative infancy, or at least in its childhood. And let's go and do some of the things that we can only do in comics and see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's great. So no one has stepped over to the camera over here, so I'm going to go to the next internet question. If one of you have a question, go over here and we will get you next. Michael Downing asked on the internet, what is it like returning to comics after focusing on prose for so many years? Are there any major lessons or influences that you brought to your work and returning to your old character?
The weird thing is that people tend to talk um, as if I was one of those posters that you used to get showing an ape, and then an ape standing a little taller, and then you get a caveman, and then you get a guy with a bowler hat. And this was my progress out of comics, and the comics was somewhere back in sort of caveman days. And the truth is, what I've actually done with my career is just wander backwards and forwards between things that I wanted to do and other things because it was fun. So, um, when people say, well, what's it like being away from comics for so many years? I want to go, well, I never actually was. Yes, I stopped doing Sandman in 96, but by 2000 and what was it, 2002, I guess I was doing 1602.
Right.
then, 2000 and whatever it was, 2006, something like that, I did the Eternals. 2009, I got to do Whatever Happened to the Cape Crusader. 2003 also was Endless Nights. So it's not like from where I was standing, it wasn't like I ever got up and went, "Haha, look, I have left comics for 10 years." I didn't do Sandman for 17 years.
Right.
Well, even that's not true. I last wrote Sandman 2003 for Endless Nights.
Yeah.
And and have written a lot of comics. Most recently, having much too much fun doing the last Batman story.
Yeah.
As a story which which was published to an enormous amount of bafflement, and now seems to be retrospectively very popular, which I kind of like, because when it came out, it was as if nobody quite knew what to make of it, and now retrospectively, it's gone on the list of the good things that I did rather than the duds that I did.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if I were to put myself in the place of the audience, I think it might be that people were wanting you to write your own creations rather than writing something for Marvel or something for DC, where it's company owned stuff. I think that might be where that thought process comes, that he's not writing comics. I mean, clearly you are writing comics, but you're not writing your own comics. Okay.
I've never.
Yeah. Shut up, Hibbs. All right.
No, it's not. It's one of those things where I was never able to see the moral advantage of, for Sandman for me these were my characters.
Yeah.
It was my it was my comic. I didn't own it, but I figured that I had a better chance of it actually getting out there into the world and changing things. If it was DC Comics than if it was me self-publishing. And I think looking at the shape of history, I remember the Dave Sims of it. Well, actually, Dave Sim himself. I was about to say I remember the Dave Sims of this world, but it was just Dave. In like 1992, and explaining how I could not see the future because DC Comics would not keep my baby in print.
Yeah.
Sandman would become forgotten. It might be good, but it would be lost, and nobody was actually gonna read this thing. The only way that I could guarantee that it would be read and in print and still kept up with and loved was if I could, if I were publishing it myself. And I was like, I'm gonna take my chances with DC. I think the odds may be on my side, and they were.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have a question here from the room. We'll switch over to that camera, and you want to introduce yourself and say hi and say your question. Wait. Oh, and we had you for a second there. There you go.
I can see you.
Yeah. Nope. He lost it again. We had it. All right. Just talk. Except for that.
Can't hear a word. So.
Okay. Can you hear me, Neil?
Yep, now I can hear you.
Nice talking to you. I actually did a fax interview with you. Yes, I'm that old. Back in 90. It was for my college thesis, so it's nice to talk to you again 25 years later. I was curious about the Sandman movie a little bit. I've read a little bit about it. I know it's early stages, but I haven't seen your name attached to it. I'm just curious if you're involved in that at all, or going to be involved, or what your thoughts are.
There's a saying. When I was a little boy in Sussex, in England, we had a saying that it went. And old men would say it, quite possibly old women too, but I only heard old men say it. And they would say, "I've lived too near the woods too long to be frightened by an owl." And Sandman movies, the first time a Warner Brothers executive asked me about a Sandman movie was like 1991. And the first Sandman movie scripts that I read were in 1995. So I tend to take a relatively benevolent but possibly slightly distant view to Sandman movies. I am sure that one day one will happen because it wouldn't make sense if one didn't. By the same token, and I've had the various presidents of Warner Brothers and DC and stuff say, Sandman is one of the jewels in our crown. Obviously, it has to be a movie. By the same token, it's big, it's long, it's literate, it's hard to squeeze into one movie. It's hard to explain what it's about. It doesn't. It was created to be 75 issues of a comic book. It was not created to be 120 minutes of cinema time. And also, it's a story in which he never hits anybody. So, which makes it not the easiest thing to adapt in the world. With the current round of people, I spent a couple of days with Joseph Gordon-Levitt over the last few years. Had a couple of long meetings with David Goyer. Have read a very solid early draft script by Jack Thorne, who is an immensely talented screenwriter, and have absolutely no idea what's happening now. The last thing I heard was that the Sandman movie was moving from Warner Brothers to New Line, along with all Vertigo projects, and that New Line was now going to be the home of Vertigo, and I've never wanted to write a Sandman movie. I figure I wrote Sandman. I remember saying to Brian, and we're talking 21-year-old Brian.
Yes.
Who asked me about Sandman movies and whether I would do my own adaptation. And I remember saying to him then, Brian, nobody should ever be forced to barbecue their own baby.
I remember that conversation vividly.
And it's one of those things where you hear a metaphor coming out of your mouth and you go, good, I will use that again. But the first time it was ever used was in conversation with Brian. Just the idea that, this is your baby, and I'm not going to chop it up, and I'm not going to marinate it in barbecue sauce, and I'm not going to put it on the grill. Somebody else can do that. And that's still how I feel.
As it well should be. Let's jump to another internet question, then we'll get to Peter here, who's standing in line quite nicely. Thank you, Peter. Wrong one. Wait, it's this one that I wanted to ask. No, it's this one that I want to ask. From Chelsea Brown. Chelsea says, I'm very bummed I can't make it tonight because, 1, you're my favorite author. Aww. And 2, your tweet about Comics Experience Book Club is how I joined. Thank you very much. Still, I'd like to ask you a question. How do you feel the comic book industry has changed since you first started? And being a prolific and internationally distributed author, do you feel any obligation or desire or anything to explore other cultures, especially given that many of your works distribute pan-mythological inspirations? Thank you.
How has the comics industry changed? Well, in a lot of ways, it's broken completely. And it's been replaced by something else. And that something else gets to wear the clothes of the old comics industry sometimes. But when I started, you had Marvel, you had DC, you had a handful of independents. There was Eclipse, there was Dark Horse. They were just starting out, and they were small. And comics, or everything important that happened in comics, was happening in periodical format. These days, you have major publishers came in, went out, came in, went out again, came in, went out, and by sort of the third generation of real publishers coming in and going out, you actually had people who knew what they were doing and had watched some of the idiocies of their predecessors. You had something that felt much more book-based, and you had the web. And the web itself, where you have this incredible burgeoning wonderfulness of new talent. You had the peculiarity of the fact that I believe that somebody was telling me that if you could count it, Kickstarter would be the third biggest publisher of graphic novels.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of just people going out into the world and creating their own stuff. At the same time as you have all sorts of publishers bringing essentially, 120 years worth of amazing comics back into print for the first time. So actually, we're in a period where, if you want to go and read Pogo, you can read Pogo. When I was a young comics person, first of all, you couldn't read Pogo, and then you could read Pogo by going out and buying the paying collector money for the old Pogo collections that were falling apart. But even they weren't the actual Pogo strips. Yeah. And things like, and I picked Pogo as an example, but there are dozens of others just as interesting. So it would be. I made a speech in about 2006, 2005, 2006, if memory serves. It was the Eisner Awards' first ever keynote. Yeah. And it was really the second big speech I'd ever made in the world of comics. The first one was in 1993, April 1993, when I told a bunch of retailers at a Diamond Comics thing that they were in the middle of the Dutch tulip craze, and that the comic stuff that was going on was a bubble, and that unless they concentrated on selling good comics, they would be doomed.
They didn't.
And that was the only speech I ever gave that really, if you ever want the feeling of giving a 25-minute speech and getting to the end and having like 4 people in a hall of 1,000 people clap.
I was one of them.
Brian was clapping. Brian was going, yeah, and like, you were probably the only person at your table who even clapped. I mean, at least nobody booed.
It was stony silence from everybody else. Stony, like, why does he say this? No, bad Neil.
And it mostly made me sad because of those 1,000 retailers who were not clapping, the ones who clapped were still in business 5 years later, and most of the other guys weren't. And it was kind of sad because they were the ones who believed the hype. Anyway, so that was the dark speech I gave. The good speech was in 2006 when I said, look, we are in a golden age and nobody has noticed yet. And one of the things that, as far as I'm concerned, is true is the golden age honestly just keeps on getting goldener. And nobody's noticed. The fact that we have a lot of women creators, the fact that we have a lot of young, smart creators of all kinds of backgrounds, the kinds of people who just didn't wind up in comics, or if they did, the worlds of comics was not friendly enough and it was not welcoming enough. But now, I love the fact that we have more trans creators, more creators of color, more GBLT creators. I think this is so cool. And it's definitely, and when you put that, the amount of old glorious stuff that you can finally read for the first time and read beautifully, the fact that we are no longer in a world in which it's superhero comics or it's nothing, or at least it's superhero comics or it's that one shelf of weird shit over on the side. We've been through that. Brian has been through that.